What is good, everybody? Welcome back to the show. Hope everybody's had a great and safe week. I know some weather's being a little bit crazy out there in certain parts of the world tonight, so please be safe out there. Our prayers are to those that are being affected by by the weather. It's been one crazy year so far. 2025 as far as weather goes, and hopefully everybody's still staying safe out there. Welcome back to the show. Please hit the like button. Please hit the subscribe button. Ring that notification bell. You guys know what to do. Before we get into today's conversation, I know I put it in the live chat, but just kind of want to remind you guys real quick of our shop. If you're interested in some of our merchandise, that's going to be at the Bonfire website. That is in our it's in the description. Go check it out. You have the things of that nature t-shirt. We have the Salty Mofos t-shirt, DTS, etc., etc. So much more stuff. Go check it out. You guys won't be disappointed. But today we have a great show. We have a great guest, a returning guest. Her name is Jennifer Coffindaffer. She is former FBI agent. Hello, Ms. Coffindaffer. Welcome back to the show. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me back. Always love to be here.
I appreciate that. I had a lot of great feedback on the last time that you were on, and I couldn't wait to get you back on and talk about the case, especially now that so much stuff has been dropped. It seems like Judge Hippler has kept on his word that he doesn't want transparency anymore. I mean, he wants transparency now. No more of this sealed stuff. How do you like it so far?
I appreciate it in this case because when you really look, so much was sealed that isn't under the normal terms of sealing. In other words, they're not protecting an investigation, an informant, information that could get somebody hurt. It's nothing like that. They've just really done a blanket protection of all the information, and there's really no legal standard for that. And Hippler came in and said no more, and I appreciate that.
I do too. I think that he's shown more of a backbone. Not saying that judge didn't. It just kind of seemed like maybe perhaps it's a bigger area, it's a bigger county with a lot more people. Maybe perhaps it's the experience, but he just seems to be able to put his foot down and put things in the right direction. I believe this case is going forward as planned, but there's some new docs that have been dropped. And here recently, and I want to get your opinions on this guy, there's a new special deputy prosecutor, Joshua Hewitt, and he is a former U.S. attorney, I believe, for the state of Idaho. What are your thoughts on the prosecution going on, getting an all-star like this?
I really like to see it. A lot of people might say, listen, as a line AUSA, we call them the assistant United States that work under the United States attorneys, that they have more litigation experience. But these people, the United States attorneys, get to their positions for a reason. And typically, many of them have extensive legal background and trying cases, and they're very good with witnesses. They're very good politically in terms of, preparing documents and their interactions with all sorts of people that are going to be involved in this case. And I'm particularly fine that his first motion right out of the gate is he says, listen, there's some discovery that's missing from the medical information that was provided pertaining to Bryan Kohberger. And I think this is all critical, and hopefully he's right. And there's more for, the prosecution to see.
I agree. He's going through it. He's doing the work. I've heard that he's got the flash, so to speak. He's the Hank Brennan of the Karen Reed case. He's going to go in there and be able to match what Ann Taylor has been throwing out there as far as, Ann Taylor, she's done a great job as far as being a defensive attorney. Anytime that there's some sort of question that comes up, she has a way of saying, oh, well, let's talk about that now that you bring this up, and then really never says anything about it. But the way that she says it is in a manner that is like, oh man, she has something, she knows something, and then nothing ever comes out of it. Kind of similar to like the Cy stuff that's happening right now. I know we talked a little bit beforehand, and you said you weren't too versed in it, so I'll just kind of try to catch you up as quick as possible. There are two things with Cy. There's one, he's accusing the state for withholding information, which are these advanced timing records from AT&T. And two, he's asserting that he can partially corroborate Bryan Kohberger's alibi because there's a 7-minute window there where the state had put in their probable cause affidavit that Bryan Kohberger turned off his phone and it stopped reporting to the network. In reality, it was a 7 minutes later type of situation. And so, first, to tackle the advanced timing records, the state put out a motion in limine saying, "Hey, we want the defense to stop saying that we withheld information. It's ludicrous. That never happened." The defense came back with Cyray saying, "Well, we know you have these records because we see these records from 2 victims and from 3,800 other individuals from the tower dump early on." And so the state comes back and says, "Well, yeah, but that's because in 2022, AT&T held on to advanced timing records for only 7 days. And so the victims and the 3,800 persons that had their phone numbers associated with that tower dump were all within that 7-day time frame." And then the defense comes back with an interesting response. They come back saying, "Well, we know you have them because you have these other people," just kind of completely blowing by the 7-day thing. And even in Cy Ray's own affidavit, he brings up instances where they have the call detail record or the advanced timing records, but all of his examples are within the 7-day period. And as we know, Bryan Kohberger didn't become a suspect until December 19th when his name came up in the IGG. And so to me, there's no argument there, but the Kohbergers seem to think that because Cy Ray said that, he thinks this is some sort of injustice, that there's some sort of injustice going on. How do you think now, hopefully I explained that correctly, but how do you think that's going to play out?
Well, no, first of all, I appreciate all that detail you gave it when all of this came to light, which, as a reminder, happened really over a year ago. Well, almost exactly a year ago, with Cy Ray getting involved in all of this. And as you said, putting forth that, it could be proven that Bryan Kohberger wasn't near 1122 King Road. When I read that, for me, because I know the evidence, it does not align with the evidence that has been sworn to in a probable cause affidavit, that has been testified to, everything we've seen in the court documents. It's just really the antithesis of that, combined with what happened just recently, now a whole year later, and him coming out and talking about these timing records. I just have to be honest, and this is what I said, I just give him no credence. I don't mean that at him as a person or him and his background. I'm not saying that. I'm saying his conclusions and what he is saying to me. When I read them, I could find no basis for the statements that he was making, and it just seemed inflammatory to get attention. That was just my take.
I agree with you, and I agree with you even more wholeheartedly once we found out what his corroborating exculpatory evidence was going to end up being, and that was the 7 minutes that he was talking about. Now, let's see. Let me pull this down real quick. And he's a nut. Let's see. Wrong one. Oh, wrong one. And it's this one. All righty. So there's this whole 7-minute thing, right? And I went back to the PCA to try to figure out what was going on. And yes, in the PCA, it does indicate that at approximately 2:47 that Bryan Kohberger's phone turns off. And it also indicates that well, it says there at 2:47 the phone turns off. But there's more to it. There's more than it was just his cell phone activity that night that had him there. Now Ann Taylor's arguing for 7 minutes. She's saying that the phone does not turn off at 2:40 at 2:47. It turns off at 2:54. And she goes on to say that a vehicle can travel pretty far in 7 minutes. And so, it got me thinking, all right, well, let's look at the area. Let's look at what happened. And in the probable cause, there was more than just the phone locations. There was also cameras that captured Bryan Kohberger, and they were able to corroborate each other to determine it was the same vehicle. Now, that vehicle they saw traveling on Southeast Nevada Street, and at approximately 2:44, and then it comes back at 2:53. And so if we were to look here, this is Nevada Street, and this is the direction it's going. And it says at approximately 2:53 that the vehicle then heads southbound towards SR 270, which is this road right here. It's also where it says Paradise Creek. That road there, which leads to Pullman. And they say that at 3:02, there's a vehicle that is seen passing by the, where is it? Right here, Floyd's Cannabis Shop along this road. And so the argument is that the phone did not turn off at 2:47. The phone continued to stay on until 2:54, and that the phone was traveling in a different direction than SR 270, and that the vehicle was traveling in an opposite direction as well at that time. Now, obviously, he could just stop, turn around, do a U-turn, and go that direction. But I went back and looked at it, and he was actually in this area until about 2:53. So even though they thought that his phone was off for about 6 minutes at this point, they had visual footage of where his vehicle was until 2:53. And their statement is right here that he turned southbound or towards 270 at 2:53. And Bryan Kohberger's team is arguing that he did not turn this way. Now, I'm assuming that this camera is going to capture him turning a different direction, because that's what they're arguing. But what people don't understand is there's a road right here, down this road, that takes you, and it's only 4.5 miles long, and it pops you right back out here on 270, right in front of Floyd Cannabis Shop. And so even though he didn't turn off on 270 at 2:53 a.m., there is another road that he would have taken or could have taken that could have gotten him right back in front of it, right in time. And so to me, this kind of just blows up anything that says that is exculpatory, because this is obviously within reason. 4.3 miles in 7 minutes is not a hard thing to do in a vehicle. What do you think?
I agree with your analysis. I was just thinking, I was pulling out my notes here because I went over every single detail of who they're planning to call, in other words, their order of proof, and what video cameras they're planning on using. And I think that could supplement your analysis, because I've noticed that they've really pulled out a lot of the camera footage that they were going to use. I think that's twofold. I think part of it is because if you have the car seen in a particular area from one camera that's clearer than another camera, you're going to make as few entries as you need. And then also, I think they have established the exact route. And per what you said, I think you explained exactly why Cy Ray's conclusions don't line up. It makes a conclusion based on one thing that isn't even proven by him yet. And it is juxtaposed to the information we have.
Yeah, I to me, and it's in his document, in his affidavit, he actually throws an FBI agent under the bus. He says in August of 2021 that he was approached by an FBI agent who provided him with the advanced timing records, and this was the first time that he got word of them. Some of the Kohbergers, they thought that this part of the affidavit meant that Cy Ray saw Bryan Kohberger's timing advance records and they took them away from him. No, this was a different incident. This happened in August of 2021, way before the murders. And this is when he first saw them. And this is what he talks about. He's like, I know their existence. And my rebuttal was, of course, it's they gave them to you. The reason that you know about the 3800, the tower dumped the 3800 phones, the two of the phones of the deceased victims, is because the state gave it to you. Nobody's hiding anything.
Exactly.
And it's frustrating, but I don't think he's going to testify. I don't think they're going to allow him on court. It didn't seem like the judge was going to allow him to talk before this. I highly doubt he's going to let him talk now.
Yeah, I agree with you. And at the end of the day, the battle of the experts in terms of the details regarding how they are looking through that digital evidence, that's going to all come out. It's going to be well lined out for everybody who saw, as an example, the trial of Murdaugh.
Mhm.
That is what the detail that they're going to be able to give. And I understand the phone was off, and now we know it wasn't off because of some cell situation. It was off because it was turned off, right? That was new evidence that we received too, which is so significant if a phone's been turned off before murder as opposed to just lost signal. So we know that now. But, I always leave sort of the nuts and bolts, just talking about the digital information, to those experts. Obviously, they break it down, that we've been able to see the breakdown of what they have. But how they get to that, I always leave to them. But I agree with you. I think Cy is.
Yeah. And I think that the reason why he's doing this is because he's been out. He's been thrown out of a couple of courts or trials, saying that his stuff is junk science. He's throwing the FBI agent under the bus. If your plan or your intentions is to continue to work with law enforcement, that's not really a move you're going to make. That's a move you make, and you put out there to defense attorneys of the world who you're hoping hire you, in my opinion, versus, hey, I want you to hire me, law enforcement agencies, and then I'm going to turn around and throw you under the bus in my next hearing that I can't. That's not how it works. So I think it's all just a strategy to get him some publicity in the end. And, although it's not the best news for him, because I don't think it's going to work out for him. In the world of business, any news is good news, whether it's bad or whatever the case may be. So, it's working for him. He's got his name out there. Since the last time we spoke, there was a lot of things that were released. One of those things was the 911 phone call. I had it for a little bit, and then it came out, and I released it on my channel. We broke it down. There was a lot of things that I heard in that, mainly that they discovered the bodies in that moment. But I think a lot of people came to the realization, though, that of how much trauma was being involved there with the victims, the surviving victims. What did you take from that 911 call?
I'm so glad you started off with that, because for anybody who thought that, or thinks still, because I see it flying around social media circles, that Dylan or Bethany were involved in any way in these horrendous murders, that 911 call made everything crystal clear in terms of their surprise and their confusion and their trauma, and trying to get the details out to the 911 operator. But because there were so many different people on the call, she was sort of chastising them, I quit passing the phone and things like that. It seemed like to me that a lot of people just weren't even comfortable with giving information, because when they tried, she was trying to do the right thing to keep focus on Xana, right? Because she thought, could this person be saved? And if they can, I need to figure that out and help instruct them on CPR. But it all became so clear, didn't it, about really somebody else being close to Xana to figure out, the young man that was there to figure out that this was much more than just a drunk person that couldn't get up. It also helped us all, I think, understand that her wounds likely weren't the slicing of the throat. She wasn't laying in a huge pool of blood. At least it doesn't seem like that, because nobody noticed that.
That's true. Yeah, that's absolutely true that you mentioned that. It was probably something further down that was not visible to everybody right away. You know, do you think that it should have been released earlier? Do you think that could have maybe saved them so much heartache?
I do think it would have. I struggle when I see a lot that we're seeing come out now. Just from my experience, you just can't withhold all of that. I struggle with the why. I really don't understand the why to this date. And I think it would have saved Bethany and Dylan a lot of anguish that they suffered, because people really didn't know what was in that call. Now we do, and everybody's seeing what we thought we would see.
Yeah, I agree. the defense is really trying to attack those young ladies, saying that they may have come up with a story together throughout that night because they were in the same bed. To me, it seems like Dylan was trying to get out. At 4 a.m., she saw somebody. She has said this multiple times. I know the defense is coming back saying that, there was some statements of hers that she was drunk, that some of it, was a dream. Do you think that her testimony is going to be a strong one? How much do you think is going to be credible given those statements of intoxication?
I think it shows she was being true. She was stating truth. She was being, veracity in what her words were. In other words, she could have said, "Oh, I barely drank and I didn't have much." She was being honest. And I think that always bodes well. Even when you say something that could be negatively interpreted, it shows honesty. And at the end of the day, you want your witnesses on the stand that are telling the truth. I also think that her testimony is really so limited in the huge picture of things, right? It was important for her to establish there was a man, essentially how they were dressed, that they were thin in build, that they were fairly tall. The balaclava, I think, was very important as opposed to a ski mask, because that's going to end up, obviously, we know now it matches a purchase by Bryan Kohberger. But the reason I think that they go to bed, right? And then they're texting the next morning, almost like nothing happened. And they're, trying to figure everything out. It's so easy to Monday morning quarterback. And for people who haven't walked one step in the shoes of Dylan and Bethany to say, well, I would have done this. Well, I'm so smart. I would have done this. I would have called 911. You know how many people think they hear something in the middle of the night? They even get up and look. They don't call 911. We're all we want to kind of take care of our own business, and we don't want to send people on a wild goose chase. I think the next morning they thought, oh gosh, I just imagined all of that. I'm going to go about my business. Did you take it like that? I really did think that.
There's one thing that I've tried to tell people, and my experience in law enforcement is that most people either don't like or fear cops. And so most crimes go unreported. I mean, they go from anywhere from assaults to serious crimes of sexual assaults to, verbal assault to physical harm, theft. I mean, all types of crimes go unreported. I think that if people realized how many crimes do go unreported, it would probably astonish some folks here. But at the end of the day, I think that that area and their experiences there in that neighborhood, I think, also play a role as to why they didn't call 911 right away. They played pranks on each other, and what did they hear? What did they hear? Did they hear somebody screaming for help? Did they hear somebody saying he's going to kill me? No, there was audio 50 feet away, and all it picked up was a thud and some words. You know what I'm saying? And so I do think that there's the possibility that, one, they were on probation already, I believe, from as far as the sorority goes, for alcohol and things like that. They had people that partied there at all hours of the night. I think there's a good chance that they weren't sure of what they heard. I mean, that's probably why they were still in the morning like, hey, are you up? What's going on? They were still in denial, and I think that also plays a huge role. Denial is probably the biggest role of anything. Is they probably figured, no way, this is just a prank. They're just playing with us. They're going to tell us it's fun, games, jokes. I mean, there was a car, the next door neighbor's car had been broken in, and the girl's underwear was thrown in the street. Some people can see that as one way. I honestly think that was a prank from one of their friends, because it was just the underwear and the clothing. It wasn't anything crazy. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was damaged. Nothing was scratched or keyed or broken. And so, I think that there's that possibility. But at the end of the day, most people don't know how they're going to act until they're in that situation. I think freezing is probably the more common reaction from those that aren't trained for high pressure situations.
No, I agree. In my self-defense classes that I teach, and I mostly teach young women, ladies that are in high school, ladies that are in college, and we do hands-on, with strangling, with, being attacked. How are you going to react? And at the end, we have, we role play and to see what the person is going to do when they're going to get attacked. And it's about a third, I would say a third freeze, and a third, or probably more than that, 2/3 want to flee, right? They just want to run. They don't want to fight. It's such a small percentage. I did my percentages wrong, but the smallest percent that really hang in there and fight. And my point is, to your point, you're exactly right. From my experience, people freeze because they don't know what else to do. And the other thing I was going to comment is that alcohol exacerbates everything, right? In other words, things can be funnier, things can be scarier, things are magnified. And so imagine then when she gets up and she's much more sober and kind of together, and she's probably laying in bed going, what was I thinking? Yeah, a mask guy was in there with, I can just see her thinking that, just like she mentioned, was that some sort of a dream? Everything seems fine now. I'm fine. Don't hear anything going on.
Well, even Bethany told her Xana was wearing all black. So I think that, that was probably Dylan saying, I saw somebody wearing all black in the house. And then, Xana was wearing all black, which is another thing. If she was wearing all black and if she was bleeding, it might be something that you can't see. That I think the color of her clothing may have masked some of the blood. As far as, some people saying, well, why isn't there the mention of blood on the 911 call? Well, if she was wearing all black, that might have covered some of that. But to me, I think she was very consistent. She spoke about the same guy, the same clothing. She drew the balaclava mask. I probably pronounced that wrong. I think she's going to be very credible. What do you think about Bryan Kohberger's purchase being so scattered around? And you have a purchase in June, you got a purchase in January, a purchase over here. It seems like they've been able to piece together his entire kill kit. But what do you think about it being purchased scattered like that?
I think it's as he's fantasizing and as he's really playing out what his plans are in his mind and how he's going to do it. That's where you see additional purchases, exactly what you said, a kill kit, whatever you want to call it. It's basically his kit and what he needs to commit the crime. So if he's still really kind of mastering through in his brain how he's going to do it, when he's going to do it, where he's going to do it, that's going to change what he really thinks he might need. And then I also think it's a part of just getting braver, right? He's moving more toward that goal. And so I think that's why some things are scattered as well.
Yeah, I think you're probably more right. I had a thought that maybe perhaps it was part of his plan that I tend to think that because of his PhD program in criminal justice, that he must be super intelligent. I know he made a lot of mistakes, but I thought that maybe perhaps it was so that he wouldn't leave a trail. But I think that makes a lot more sense, is that it was more of a buildup than that. I think that makes absolutely perfect sense. They released a document that he wrote back in May of 2020. And this was during his classes in DeSales. Very, very meticulous. It was about what he would do as an investigator at a crime scene. Very interesting, the target. I'm not sure if he chose it or not, but if he had a choice of crime scenes to choose to work from, a stabbing victim, very interesting, the choice there. What were your thoughts about his writing in particular and what he wrote about?
Well, a few things. First of all, I totally agree that he used a woman who was stabbed. So that was interesting. That jumped off the page. Secondarily, the meticulousness of this paper, I said I would have given it an A+. I mean, it looks more like what we would have been thrown in Quantico. That's how detailed it was, all the things he thought about. I thought it was interesting that he talked about using a hairnet, the importance of making sure he didn't leave behind anything at the scene. And he was talking from the perspective of being a detective. Just think how much further that would go if you're the suspect, how much you would want to make sure. So he thought about everything. He even thought about coveralls that wouldn't leave any fibers or any fabric behind. And I looked those up, and they exist. I mean, these are things that we would never have in an FBI kit to go do a search warrant per se. You know, those kits are sort of put together, and our search teams have them. But I can just tell you, I never had a hairnet. I probably really needed a hairnet with this hair. Just some uniqueness that he thought, and so detailed.
To me, when I was reading it, I went through it and I was like, yeah, you know, this is something that you would expect. But I was like, man, this is something you would expect from an experienced investigator. You know, the amount of stuff that they've gone through is probably what would have made this person, you know, have that experience to write these things, to go through this, and knowing that this guy had never investigated a crime before. I mean, he put a lot of thought into it. And I think that the reason why it's being put in place here is because of the means aspect of this crime. So you have the motive, opportunity, and the means. And the means is just more than the capability of committing the crime. It's also capable of committing the crime in the manner that he did, which is with the lack of DNA, with the amount of attention that this person put into. One of the things that really, really captured my eye was the fact that he wrote in there about that they need to look at the doorknobs for DNA and things of that nature. And we know that he left the sliding glass door open the entire time that he was in there. And the reason why we know that is because during the scuffle, we hear the dog barking outside. And the only way it could have been outside is if he went through that. And so to me, that dawned on me, like, you know, there's the thought where he's like, all right, the person either entering or leaving could potentially leave DNA behind. And then you have where Chief Fry says that the back sliding glass door was still open when police arrived there. Well, now you have the practice, you have the thought, and then the practice where he put it into play on something, you know, it's minor detail. And to me, I mean, I like details. So when I saw that, I was like, wow, you know, that made a huge thing. And I think that also indicates to police is that in order for somebody to have committed this crime, they must have thought of everything, or would have thought of a lot of things that investigators would have done to investigate this crime. And this is an example that this man has at least done that. And that's typically not something that you would see from, let's just say, who are the favorite suspects? Signa Fry guy, right? The guy who was roid raging off of that was upset. Well, you know, is he going to go in there and commit a crime? You know, drive around 3 different times, silently walk in. I mean, you're roid raging, you're drunk, you're willing to fight, you know, Ethan in front of everybody, but yet at this point now you're silent and methodical. Doubt it. You know, love drunk. You know, passion, same thing, not the case. So kind of leads me to believe, or that kind of points in the direction that, well, one, the motive as well is a thrill kill. I think that's what it ends up being. I know you think he's an incel. Is that correct?
Yeah, I really do think he's involuntary celibate, you know, a guy that goes through their life and they're, you know, can't get the girl. Very awkward around women. You know, he lost 130 pounds. He was a huge kid, and you know, just bullied, everything he had to suffer, and then the bullied becomes the bullier. You know, I think there's a lot of statements from people who knew him and saw after he lost weight and sort of changed his whole persona, him becoming rude and you know, a bullying type nature, which was really a metamorphosis. So I'm convinced that this was a crime. I call it almost of revenge. You know, this is to all the beautiful girls. This is to everybody who kept me out of the popular group. This is to everybody who kept me down. I'm in control. And what a better way to be in control than to even control your life.
Yeah, I agree. And speaking about his behaviors, his defense team has brought it up a couple of times. They seem fairly concerned about his behavior, especially in front of the jury. Do you think there may be something have happened that would make them so concerned? Do you think there's been an incident between him and his lawyers by any chance that brings up such a concern?
You know what I think it is? I truly think it's social media. I think that these attorneys scrub on both sides. They have people and they themselves scrub social media. How is this case coming off? Are the people in social media, are the sleuths, are they thinking of some angle we haven't thought of? How is Bryan Kohberger coming off? Well, Bryan Kohberger is coming off as strange. He just is. His eyes are huge, and his expressions are scary. I mean, he is not the Ted Bundy, looking all suave and debonair. I mean, he's coming off much more to me like a Dahmer. He's not a friendly looking like BTK. He looks like the older gentleman next door. So I think they're trying to work on that and explain why he has this kind of bizarre look. I think that's where they started. We gotta do some control on this deal.
I agree. That's you could tell you're experienced much more than I am. That makes perfect sense. This is an image of him. This is one of that night. Do you think he's changed in appearance since then?
Oh, he has. It was funny because the first time I saw him all groomed up, I said, "Oh my gosh, they trimmed his eyebrows." And then I joked around and I said, "I guess they think if the eyebrows don't fit, they must have quit or something." Because they trim those up. They're shorter actually even. And he seems so, in this particular picture that you're pointing out, he seems almost like there's no blood in his face. And I just think it's because, physically speaking, he exerted everything he had. I think a lifetime of buildup and rage, and then all those endorphins and everything. And this is his "I did it" picture to himself. I don't think he was sending this to anybody. This is for him. This is his screensaver. This is his reminder of what he accomplished. That's how I see it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, he got dressed up. I don't think he stayed in that clothing. I know he goes to Washington shortly after that, and then he spends 5 hours out in the wilderness where his phone was off the night before. And so I think you're absolutely right. One thing though that strikes me odd is his hair color. I mean, let's just say he's wearing this balaclava mask. He's not taking a shower. I think he didn't get home till after 5:40 in the morning. So he's been sitting with at least blood in his hair for over an hour. Do you think that that's what we're seeing here as far as the red tint to his hair? Because it's a lot more red than in any other picture.
So no, because I think he came home and completely showered off. And then I think he went back out. Remember, we know he went back over there at about 9:30 in the morning. He was back over there, I think, looking for the sheath and looking for why in the world isn't everybody making a big deal about this amazing crime I just committed? I think that bothered him. I think he wanted to check it out. And then I think he goes back home and gets all showered up again. And I think that's this picture, which I think was taken at 10:31. I'm just going from memory. So if everybody says, "Jen, it was 10:35," but right in that neighborhood. So I think possibly a 2-shower situation. But clearly in this picture, to me, he looks fresh out of the shower. And I wondered, when I saw that, I wondered if that was a gel of some nature. And I also think he's jamming out to a song that reminds him of this case and what he was going to do, that he had it going on for months in advance. He would listen to that song. And I think he's listening to that song. I think that's why the earbuds are in, but that's just my thoughts.
It could be. The other thought I had was, because I looked it up, and I looked up if does blood stain hair, and it does. But, I thought maybe he knows that. Maybe he dyed his hair in preparation for if there was some stain in his head, that it would mask it with that. The headphones is interesting. I wonder if it's Huey Lewis and the news, but that's because of an American Psycho connection that I think might be there. Have you seen American Psycho? Have you seen the movie?
I have never seen that movie.
Oh my
Is it a
gosh.
good one? Do I need to see it?
If you watch it knowing what you know about Bryan Kohberger, and you're going to be like, what? All right. So it starts off with where he talks about himself being 27 years old. Bryan Kohberger at the time of this crime was 27 years old. And he's going through his morning regimen or whatnot. And he talks about these, and he takes a shower, and this is Christian Bale. And he's putting all these different soaps and stuff on his body, on his face. And then he has this mask, and he has his monologue. And when he's talking, he's pulling off the mask, and he's saying that he has a mask, but it's also a figurative saying about a mask that Patrick Bateman, the guy that he is, isn't real. There's nobody there. He's blank. He doesn't have any feelings, and he has a blank stare. And it's eerily similar to some of the things that Bryan Kohberger wrote about his feelings, and not necessarily saying that, not necessarily saying that Bryan Kohberger is him, but it almost as if Bryan Kohberger took inspiration from him. Now he's pulling off let me find the right picture. So he's pulling off that mask, and in that mask, he's talking about what he put in his face. And there's all these sorts of different facial products that he talks about. And when he pulls that mask off, I can't help but notice how shiny the character Patrick Bateman, his face is, and how clean it is. And then you look at Bryan Kohberger's face, and you see that there, at how clean he looks there. There's a couple of images. Let me pull these up. So this is that image there. Here's Patrick Bateman. This is a scene right before Patrick Bateman, he's a serial killer in the movie American Psycho. He has no feelings, etc. There's the thumbs up. There's the headphones. In this movie, he listens to Huey Lewis during much of his murders. And so I was just wondering if this was to me, I think this may be a movie that he saw himself in, similar to like the Reddit survey where he was talking to ex-cons about their feelings during crimes and etc. I wouldn't be surprised if there's some connection there. I challenge you to watch it and let me know what you think.
Yeah, I definitely will now. And you point out a lot of very interesting things. I am convinced that he pulled, at least to some degree, from BTK, Dennis Rader. We know that Ramsland, who studied Rader, also taught Bryan Kohberger, meaning at DeSales. And so I've really thought that was part of his inspiration, but really not for how he committed the crimes, because BTK didn't want to get dirty. I mean, Bryan Kohberger, if he committed these crimes, oh my gosh, this is somebody who doesn't mind getting bloody and, in the death, right? As opposed to somebody who chooses to strangle. This is somebody who wants that blood, who wants that feeling. And so I think in some ways he pulled from that. And you're making me wonder now. I mean, you're pulling up those headphones and some other things. You got me wondering now. So I'm going to have to watch that movie, and that'll be interesting to see if he watched that movie or if they can show that.
Yeah, Patrick brings up an excellent point, because Bryan Kohberger made a statement during one of his dates. He said something about birthing hips to a young lady, and that is out of the movie Dark Shadows with Johnny Depp. And in that movie, Johnny Depp's a weirdo. He's a vampire, and he's awkward, kind of similar to Bryan Kohberger. I mean, kind of similar to the vampire picture. He kind of looks like him there too. And in this, he talks about how he's in love with this one girl and she has great birthing hips. And to me, I was just thinking to myself, at the time, well, he was on a date. They were probably watching a Johnny Depp movie, and he probably brought up the birthing hips, and she didn't catch on. But I mean, if he's bringing up just something like that, maybe he is somebody that watches quite a few movies. I don't know. I like I said, I see a lot of eerie similarities. 27 years old. A lot of people ask why that night. There was a lot of cars out there. His birthday was next week. Maybe there was something there. I don't know. That's my conspiracy mind going.
Well, I think there is a reason why he chose when he did. He's too meticulous. But there was something he brought up in that paper that you brought up, talking about why people stab. And that really interested me because he was doing a paper on crime scene investigation.
Mm-hmm.
So on crime scene investigation, you don't really need to talk about the motive of the stabber, right? Your focus should be strictly on how you are processing this crime scene. And what he said, and I'm not sure if this is going to be verbatim, but he said basically people that stab are very passionate, right? They're full of passion.
Mm-hmm.
And he also said it's something that is less planned. He doesn't say it like that. He uses a very specific word. And so many people, I wrote about this on Twitter, many people said, well, Jen, this was totally planned, totally planned. But I wondered if this particular night, impulsive, that's what he says, impulsive. And it made me wonder, and I understand this paper was written well before this crime was committed, but I wondered if maybe he got the impulse that night. It wasn't that it was always planned for that night, but he was like, damn it, this is the night. I'm ready. I'm going, Yeah. And so I've always wondered that. And then when I saw that paper, in other words, was this planned down to him deciding that particular time, or was it more of the impulse of the day? And then when I saw that in the paper, I thought, wow, maybe this was just impulse of the day he chose.
Yeah, it could be. It definitely could have been. Not everything has to have a meaning behind it. I mean, it could have just been that. I know a lot of people were looking at his birthday. I think his birthday is November 21st. It's 11/22. I know I got confused because I looked at his date of birth on the driver's license. I saw the expiration date of the 22nd. I was like, whoa, November 22nd, but it's the 21st. So here's the other question I have for you. I think his appearance has changed. I think he's gotten thicker since he's gotten away from since he's been arrested and been in prison. I strongly suspect he's on something. That's my opinion. I think he was on something. He was on drugs. He had a history of being on drugs. I think that his face is thinned in. It's sunk in. He is very thin compared to where he is now. And I think that, this was him in the beginning of at the University of Idaho. So he was thin, but he wasn't super skinny. This was him at DeSales. This was also him at DeSales. Now, I see that in DeSales, he dropped a lot of weight. Do you think there could be some sort of connection between the weight loss and weight gain with maybe perhaps another crime being committed? Because, I don't know. I'm wondering.
Bryan Kohberger was somebody that really became obsessed with his weight to me. Anybody who can lose 130 pounds, I just don't, that is just so impressive. Like I try to lose 5 pounds and firm up and I'm like, oh God, this is going to take me weeks to have it stay off. So it tells you a lot about his personality, that once he puts his mind to something, he has the fortitude and the wherewithal to get that done. And so I'm wondering, because I agree with you, and I've looked at a lot of different pictures, sometimes he just looks more healthy, and other times he looks so gaunt. But remember, this is a guy that was also running, at least we know to some degree, running almost a 6-minute mile. That's so impressive. I know the information we have, it was only about a mile, 0.38, something like that. Again, I'm just going from my memory. But nevertheless, this is a guy who's working out. He kicked I think being in shape was really super important to him for a couple of reasons, to keep that weight off. But also, I've always felt like he was in training for this. I think he's thought about murdering for years. And I think this was part of being in training. But you bring up an interesting point about the gauntness. Could that relate to a crime? I just don't think he did another crime like this prior to this one.
Do you think he would have had he not gotten caught? Do you think there'd be more?
I personally really do. I just believe anybody capable of planning, taking a K-bar knife, walking into this house, and viciously massacring 4 people, they are well capable and down the road to commit more murders. Absolutely.
Yeah. I don't think it's any surprise that, or no surprise to me at least, that it shouldn't come shocking that this was the first time he was on his own, and with right away, well, even before he was on his own, he had purchased the knife, he had purchased the mask. So I think he had the thought that as soon as he was on his own, that this was going to happen to somebody. And, first time on his own, he's lost his job right away with a TA, or at least started having some problems. There was a Bryan tally. I don't know if you remember that from one of the Dateline, that some of the PhD students were marking down some of his behaviors, and I think that there was at least part of his behavioral plan had to do with some accusations, because I read somewhere that he was cleared. I think the defense said that, yeah, it was in the defense's statement that he was cleared. Well, you can't be cleared unless there's an investigation. You can't have an investigation unless there's an accusation. And so the way it probably got cleared was because it was probably a he said, she said, and those girls were probably directed to write everything down, which is what they were probably doing when they were creating this Bryan tally. I say all that to just say that I think that the only reason it hadn't happened yet was because he was with his parents at that time.
I think that point you are making is so spot on, because now he has the freedom. He doesn't have any parents to, disappoint or to look over his shoulder. I mean, we know his father turned him in for stealing his sister's cell phone, filed a police report to get him charged. So clearly, I think if he was at home catting around and, making preparations, sitting there unsnapping and resnapping a K-bar knife, his parents might have been a little bit suspicious. So you're right. I think it was that freedom that enabled him to go ahead and make the move.
Do you think
move to kill?
Yeah. And I think that, and I think his parents and his family noticed it. I mean, I think they spoke. The state is all but put in there. I mean, I know we have to wait for their list of witnesses, but I'm fairly positive we're going to see some folks with the last name Kohberger on those witness lists. They put on there that they intend on potentially having them call up for state witnesses. I mean, that tells you a lot there that, yeah, had he done something, or had he been maybe a little bit more suspicious, or had there been other crimes that that they were pointing in that direction, they may have been more upfront about it and coming forth to discuss.
Yeah, and to your point, there are going to be Kohbergers on that list, if for nothing more than saying they didn't purchase the K-bar knife, because it seems like this is a family Amazon plan. And although they're going to be able to show through credit card receipts and delivery information, perhaps the timing of the deliveries and things like that, I think that they are going to have to call these family members that could have possibly ordered the knife, at least that had access, and they're going to show his keystrokes on his computer, I think, that match up with the time that the orders took place. I think they're going to have a lot, but I think that's one regard. But the regard you're talking about is, are the sisters, are the parents going to say anything negative? Remember, those parents went in with their heels dug in when they were called for the grand jury on the case of the young woman back east that he was cleared on.
Mm-hmm.
So I keep wondering if he won't even if they're going to be reluctant witnesses, difficult witnesses on the stand. I expect that from the parents.
I wonder. I've wondered why they wanted his parents there at that, and Dana Smithers and a grand jury, and I think I may have somewhat figured it out. So they were pretty specific on the time frame, right? They said March 20th through March 30th of 2022, and that they knew this because of a witness. They were. I'm wondering if they brought in mom and dad to testify for grand jury to pinpoint a date when Bryan Kohberger purchased that K-bar knife so that they can go get that warrant.
That's interesting. I think 100% they were able to use what was said in that grand jury for the investigation in Idaho. I remember looking through all of that and definitely pinpointing that what he said in that grand jury would be able to be reviewed by prosecutors in Idaho. So I agree with you that them calling Kohberger for Smithers could have been a little bit of a ruse, right? To get them on the stand and to line out particular dates and actions and movements and to get them on record to assist with the other investigation. So I've always, you've been in law enforcement, you use the tools that you have, and it would make sense that they would at least consider Bryan Kohberger, even though the MO was totally off. You'd have to clear him. And so to me, it was very twofold, but I agree with you that it was used in their investigative efforts.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause I mean, that 10-day window, I thought maybe at first somebody came up with that information and just disclosed that. But now that I think about it, it may have been through there. We're going to take just a few moments to answer a few questions, if that's okay.
Perfect.
We have almost 2,800 people watching on throughout all the channels. So thank you guys. Like, subscribe, follow, share it. I know it's on Twitter. It's on my Twitter, your Twitter. It's on Facebook, YouTube, everywhere. So 2,800 of you guys are in here watching. Thank you guys.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
We have Stephanie Stringer coming in, becoming the newest YouTube membership. And the only ones that I can see as far as, what are they called? The super chats are on my side. So if there's any that have come through on Jennifer's side, I can't see those on my end.
I can't see them either. I think it would just go through. Well, I don't know. I don't see it either.
Natalie comes in with a $49.99.
Wow.
Thank you, Natalie. Amelia with $3. Freedom is asking for your channel's name, and that is Breaking the Case with Jennifer Coffendaffer. It's in the link in the description. Let's see. Do you think that the victims were targeted after all, or do you think that they were just randomly selected?
So, if we're talking about from the inception of him choosing them, I truly believe they were chosen, and I think we know that because of the 12 visits that were made. And I always say this, there's a huge difference between stalking and surveilling.
It's changed. It's 23 visits between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. between July and November 7th.
I'm sorry, I missed that. What was that in? Was that
that was in one of the more recent documents?
Okay, great.
Yeah,
was that the 100-pager?
No, but it was within that group of several documents that had a lot. Yeah, it was 23 times within 100 meter radius of the house.
So that makes me know, they were absolutely, there was a target there, because you wouldn't keep going to the same place over and over if they weren't your target. And so that speaks to that. Secondarily, I really think it's Maddie Mogen. And I've always said that. And the reason I think it's Maddie Mogen is because Kaylee had moved away. We all know that. The car she returned in, yes, she had a car, but it was a car nobody had seen. That was one of the reasons that was the impetus for her coming back that weekend. So because of that as well, I just think it's Maddie. Also, Maddie's structure. Maddie is so thin and petite, and it goes back to this, I think, his how much worth he finds in being slender and being thin. And Maddie was living there. Kaylee really wasn't. And I think he's sorely, and this is why I think it might have been more like he mentioned, passion and him making a last minute decision. He didn't do the proper surveillance the night he was going to do this, or he would have seen, whose car is that? Oh my gosh, Kaylee's there. So I'm not convinced he did the proper surveillance before this, and that's why he had that shock, that they were both in the bed together.
Yeah. I think that was definitely a huge shock. And here's the document. It's a 16-page document. It's a defense's document. It states here that on pages 29 and 30th, a 845 phone utilizes cell service between the hours of 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. 23 separate instances between July 9th and November 7th, 2022. I mean, there's no shopping in that hour in that neighborhood.
No.
And it's just interesting. And I went back to the PCA, and I noticed one thing. I noticed that it said that they were going to go back and look at his historical cell data to determine if he stalked, and then it said, surveil the residence. It made those two separate things in the PCA. It's not one thing; it's two separate things. Do you think? I know that I've looked up the Idaho state statute, and in order for it to be stalking, there has to be harassment, fear, and annoyance. So the victim would have had some sort of knowledge that she was being followed. But federally, is there something that can be done against him if he were to get off on these charges?
Oh, yes, because he traveled interstate to commit this crime. So, no matter what, this could be federal venue. As you said, if for some reason he does get off, and I am quite sure with everything the Bureau has put into this, they would, welcome charging him if that would happen. And I'm so glad you mentioned the stalking vocabulary and definition and context, because this stalking somebody is the opposite of what he wanted to do. He didn't want anybody to know he was looking. He didn't want to harass. He didn't want to be noticed. It's the opposite. He was doing site surveys, just like we do, before we're going to do an arrest or do a warrant. We want to make sure we understand the lay of the land, who's there, who's not, when people go to bed, what the work schedule is, what the lay of the land is. And that's what he was doing, in my opinion.
You think that's something that they taught him in DeSales? I'm sure that in his criminal justice class, they would have taught him how to surveil.
Absolutely. And we know he went to a little class actually when he was a security guard. And he was a security guard for quite a decent period of time with his old school system where he went to high school, and where his father was worked on mechanical things. And then his mom was they call those para servers, or in other words, they're assistant teachers, but I think in the area of special needs. In any event, my point is he talks about that. I mean, learning those types of things. So he went through a class, and he mentions that in one of his applications, and we got his application.
In his resignation letter there for that security job, he wrote down that he understood that had he not resigned, that he would face a termination board. That's not something you normally write when you're leaving for a better place or a better job. That's normally something you write when you're being forced to resign. Do you think we'll hear about that situation or what happened in his past? That, do you think those things will come out in court?
It's such a great question. Just in my experience, when going to trial, you try to keep it as narrow as you can. Because once you start splintering off into things that are interesting, but they're not completely relevant to them proving that crime, I think you can sometimes lose the jurors. I think we saw that in the Karen Reed trial. I mean, they were like a shotgun blast going in too many directions. I think Brennan will focus it in. But I think the only way that could come up maybe could be rebuttal, just all the issues he was having from an early time frame, just talking about motive and really how kind of a failure he was.
Yeah. Yeah. Midwest comes in with a $2 super chat saying, I don't think so, but do you think he'll testify?
No chance. I don't think he will. I don't think he will based on his knowledge of the court system and how problematic it can be. And certainly Ann Taylor is going to want to keep him off the stand. So my response is thumbs down. He won't.
The wet captain now says, any concern one jury could hold out for a mistrial? I mean, that's a long ways to think about something like that.
Gosh, I hope not. I mean, you hope not. I really think they'll be able to find a really good jury here because it's Boise. It's huge. It's big. If you're not a true crimer or a newsie, you're not even going to necessarily know about this. I'm around people all the time and they have no idea who Bryan Kohberger is. I know I'm not in Idaho, but a lot of people are busy with their lives and they're shocked you don't know who won NASCAR this year, right?
Yeah.
That's their world.
Yeah, no, I've asked some folks too, and I'm not in Idaho either, but I've asked folks, and the longer that we've gone away from the incident, the less people remember it. You know, I start talking a little bit about it, and people are like, "Oh yeah, I thought that guy was guilty already." Like, I mean, basically is, but not technically. No. Let's see. Would be interesting to see the contents of BK's Fire Stick that has been taken into evidence, what movies he's had watched. I think the Fire Stick is going to play a huge role in this case, but more so with Amazon and his purchase history than so maybe the movies. What do you think?
I agree with you. Although, I mean, it's such a study for the behavioral science unit, who I guarantee is all over this case, because he's made so much history already. And they're going to be studying everything about his habits, what movies he liked. And I wish I could see that Fire Stick right now. That's my favorite kind of evidence. I like that better than kicking indoors and interviewing people. I love to look at that digital information, you know, what they're doing. But anyway, get in their head.
I like kicking in the doors. That was my thing.
I know, I'm a knuckle dragger too. I spent 15 years on SWAT.
Yeah.
So don't tell anybody. Like, I'm the nerdiest SWATter around.
That's funny. You know, I went through SWAT too. I didn't go through anything major. We had a SWAT training class and stuff with my department, but they put us in there and we went through some crazy things, you know, as far as like, I had one situation where this guy, PTSD moment, hostage with his family, called us out there. I show up, but I'm in the wrong car. And so all I have with me is a Glock, and everybody's around me walking up with their ARs and shotguns. And I'm there like, that's all I got. You know, my car was in the shop. What can I say? I should have taken my stuff out, but they pulled it out before I could. Jeremiah asks, he wants to know your opinion on the extent of bruising that could happen to Bryan Kohberger from stabbing 4 people.
You know, I have looked so closely, just like everybody has. And I mean, I definitely, from my view, from what we can see in the picture, the shower picture, I see bruising on his hand that we can see, the one we can see, obviously. I also see something on his neck. I also, and I'm not sure how accurate it is, but in the Indiana picture, you know, he was pulled over twice. At least in one of the pictures, and I took this straight off of the original footage from the BWC, the body worn camera. And I see a big scratch there healing. And, you know, I don't know. A lot of people said, oh, that's been filtered. That's, you know, AI and everything else. I think it's going to be very interesting to see, because I think it's such a great question. And I think you can have a lot of bruising because, again, that stabbing motion, again, you're keeping the people down. For anybody who hasn't been in a confrontation, even though they had the K-bar, and I think Maddie's was very quick, and Kaylee's was probably fairly quick. When I say quick, just seconds or so. But you bruise. I mean, it's a battle. It's a battle. they're fighting, you're trying to get control of them, you're all over them. So I would think there could have been bruising. The problem was it was so late, right?
Yeah.
5 weeks later. But
Yeah,
not
well,
in this picture.
yeah, not in this one. I think, I mean, look at that knuckle. Look at that hand, that first one. And then, I mean, it's hard to see, but let me pull this off real quick. Sorry, Art. But right here, there's something there on that finger. I don't know if that's a Band-Aid, if that's a cut. There's something on that finger, and this knuckle here just do not look normal size to me. They look swollen.
And look at the thumb. Follow that thumb down there.
Yeah.
To the hand. See that bruising further down. Like if you go down his hand, right there.
There it is.
That's the one that I saw that really just was a beacon to me. And so you're going to have marks and things, but they're only going to have whatever photos he took to rely on.
Yeah. No, I agree. Art comes in saying, have either one of you watched Amanda's slasher movie called 2 Days Back? A very large knife was used to kill. I've not seen that movie. I probably should watch it. Have you seen Bryan Kohberger's sister's movie?
No, I haven't, and I should watch it. Obviously, you can tell from our previous discourse, I do not watch a lot of movies or television, if you can believe it. So anyway, but I do want to watch it.
Yeah, I'm going to probably look it up and watch it as well. Mountain Mama says, you're stuck with me. She's been a member for 25 months. Thank you, guys. Also, we have a Discord for our members. There is a post every other day now in the community tab for members to link up to the Discord. We can have a conversation with myself and all the other members. Sirius coming in, saying another great live with you two, my faves. And Casey coming in with her 4-month membership. I'm just going to read this real quick. Don't see anything interesting. I want to thank you again, Ms. Coffindaffer, for coming on. It's been a truly a great pleasure. I want to get you back on to talk about the Karen Reed case. Mm-hmm. I know you were listed on a document here recently. Is that correct?
Oh, yes. I was listed on a document.
How does that feel?
There's nothing that surprises me anymore, but it's when things are ridiculous, you just kind of shake your head and keep rolling. The absurdity of so many things I've seen in this. I'm also, my mentor in the FBI was supposedly Michael Proctor's wife's father or something. I have never even heard of these people. It has been so interesting to see all the just fake news, beyond fake news. So I wasn't really surprised. It's fine. It's so ridiculous, but.
Well, I'm sure nothing will come out of that. And I'm sure that this trial, as far as the Karen Reed case goes, it looks like it's going in a much different direction than the first one was, in a good way. And so I didn't check out much of the first one, to be honest with you. I've only seen what's all of the second part so far. And to me, I mean, I looked at the evidence there. I think it's pretty obvious, but I'd like to get a lot of your opinions on a lot of it, because you've been covering it a lot more than I have. Again, guys, go follow her. It's in the description. Also, her Twitter or /X is linked also in the description. Anything else, Miss Coffindaffer, before we call it a show?
Yeah, you can't call me Miss Coffindaffer because I'm looking around for my mother-in-law. So please call me Jen. It's a pleasure to be here. Love your audience. Love the discourse, and all the best. Thank you.
Will do. I'm from Texas, so it's our Southern hospitality. You have a great night. Everybody else in the live chat as well, have a great night. We had over 3,000 live viewers. We appreciate all of you guys. You have a great night. Peace.